Born in a small town in Minnesota, lived there a year or two, ended up in Texas, in North Texas, in another small town called Wichita Falls. I went to school at the University of Texas at Austin and was not involved in motion pictures at all. But I ended up, for various reasons, I guess just stagnating in life, spending a lot of time at UT, doing pretty much nothing, and realized at some point I had to make a decision in life as to what to do. So I wrote down on a piece of paper the things that I enjoyed doing. Motion pictures was the only one that I decided to follow, mainly because I liked watching movies. So I figured I could do that. I never had a desire to be where I am now on this side of the camera, but I did want to be somewhere behind the camera, and I didn't know where. The handball teacher, this is a strange story, at UT happened to be the best handball player in the world. There was a small crew doing a documentary on handball there. The crew was from Phoenix, and they were doing a little documentary with 16 millimeter, shooting the professor and doing things handball related. So I would go down and watch them, and I was really fascinated with it. I ended up talking to the director, who was also owned the little company, and decided I would really like to do that. And within a week, I threw everything into my Volkswagen and came out to Hollywood to get into movies, and ended up here.
Did you have a plan once you got to Hollywood?
No, not really. I was just going to go around knocking on doors. The only person I knew here, and I didn't really know him, it was like a 2 or 3 level of separation there. But anyway, he was an editor that was here in town. And he was also trying to get in, but he'd been here for several years. And so I was talking with him, and he ended up helping me get a job at a rental house. And it was Jack Pill Tech Camera, which most people probably don't know about because they're no longer in existence. This is back in the 70s. They were a small rental outfit, and their big gimmick was they would rent to anybody on the weekends. If you picked up after 5 and returned the equipment by 11 on Monday, you would get charged for only 1 day. So you could actually, if you really worked at it, get in 3 days for the price of 1 on the equipment. A lot of low-budget companies would use them for that reason, and students would use them too from UCLA and SC to shoot their various projects. So I ended up getting back in the rental department, and I would chat up the people as they came to pick up their equipment as to what they were doing, et cetera. And they'd say, "Oh, we're shooting a little commercial down on the beach on Saturday." I would say, "Well, do you need anybody?" And they'd say, "Well, no, not really." But I would just find out where they were, and I'd just show up and just then end up working for free, just carrying boxes around and stuff like that. So then they would come back maybe a couple of weeks later, and they'd have another project. They'd say, "Are you available this weekend?" And I say, "Yeah, sure." And they say, "Well, you worked out well on carrying stuff around. I got $50. Would you like to do it again?" I said, "Sure." So you build up a clientele, and it ends up working, and one job leads to another. That was pretty much how I ended up getting into camera.
So Michael, you told us you worked at Jack Pill on Highland in Hollywood, and you worked with Aeroflex cameras at the time in the 70s. What was next?
I also worked, now that I think about it, I also worked with ingenues back then too. I really, Eclairs, which I really liked the Eclair camera. I just thought it was a nice piece of machinery. There was just something about the 16 Eclair that that fascinated me with its magazines and stuff like that. But after that, I caught a little show that was going up to San Diego. It was with kids and dogs and horses and stuff like that, kind of a modern day Western, for about 3 weeks. And then after that, did a documentary in New Mexico. Anyway, after that, I just started picking up little non-union jobs and ended up doing non-union jobs for about 5 years. The next big thing that happened, and this was instrumental in the life, was, of course, getting into the union, which everybody wants to do. I saw in Variety, I think it was, that there was going to be a test given to anybody that wanted to take it, that wanted to get into the movie business. It was going to be administered at SC on a Saturday coming up, and anybody could take it. And it was to get into the camera union. So I thought, that sounded pretty good. So I went there, and there were 1,500 people that took the test. Out of that 1,500, and it was just a kind of a general, I don't know, aptitude, IQ test, something like that. By law, because it had to do with the government, they couldn't ask any questions that related to photography, because then that would be giving photographers being favored over the people that knew nothing about photography. So any past experience didn't really play into the matter. But out of the 1,500 people, they just took the top 50 scores and interviewed the top 50, out of which they picked 10 from the interviews. And I was just lucky enough to make the 10. So from that, you went into a training program that was administered by the union, where they would send you around to all the studios. Some of the studios still had camera departments back then, not all of them, about half of them still had camera departments. And they would also assign you to shows. I did shows with Laszlo Kovacs and things of that nature. And you would work with the people on those shows for like a week, maybe 2 weeks, and then they would rotate you to go to another show and then have another trainee come in to that particular show. So we were always being rotated around. They also sent us to film houses to where we watch people. We have to go in at like 3 o'clock in the morning and watch them time the dailies and things of that nature, which was, well, I didn't like getting up at 3 o'clock in the morning, but it was what you had to do. When we got out of the program, you had immediately, what was it called, Class 1? Group 1 status, because the union realized that once you got out of the program, if you didn't get jobs, that would look bad for the program. So we were immediately into Group 1, which caused a little bit of unrest among people within the union who weren't at Group 1, and to see us pass them by and go straight to Group 1 caused a lot of dissent. And so they just got rid of the group system, which I thought was good. The people who were, had worked their way through the group system, I don't know if they agreed with me or not, but anyway, that's how I got into the union, and I used those contacts from being in that training group, because we were in that group for about a year. And you just use those contacts to start your career off.
What year did you graduate the training program, and then it was probably the following year that you were inducted into Local 659?
I would think it would be 76.
You got in as a camera assistant?
Yes.
And were you a second assistant?
Yes.
Now, you didn't have to go through a loading room to get in, because you were able to bypass that as well.
Correct.
And come in as a second AC.
Right.
And, but where did you learn how to load the film that you needed to on your first productions? Were they like Mitchell magazines, Airy BL magazines, and any of those things you weren't familiar with and had to kind of learn on-the-job training? We
actually learned that in the training department, because we were sent to the loading rooms of the studios that still had them. Universal did, Paramount did, Warner Brothers did. There was one, MGM kind of had one. It wasn't, there was like one person there, and there was only about one or two shows at MGM. So we didn't really have much to do with that studio. They wouldn't let us do the actual loading for insurance purposes, because at that point we weren't officially in the union, so we weren't really covered for liability or anything of that nature. But we would be in the loading room all day long, so we would just load dummy magazines.
Right. In daylight and then in dark. And
Right.
just get used to it.
Yeah,
Good.
that's exactly right.
Do you recall your first job as a camera assistant in the union?
In the union, yes, I do. It was, I did a couple of small things for like a few days, and I can't remember those. But the first one of significance was I was asked to go up on streets of San Francisco, which was, of course, filming in San Francisco. And that's where I met Michelle Hugo, who became instrumental and significant in my career, because he moved me from second assistant to first assistant and then on up to operator over a period of several years. It was probably about 5 years before I officially moved up to operator. So that's, Streets of San Francisco was my first job within the union. And that was for a half a season, because they were on their last season, and I filled in for someone who was leaving to go to another job.
San Francisco can be challenging, especially for a camera assistant, with the hills and the parking and the logistics. How'd that work out for you?
For camera, it was pretty good, because I can't remember the name of the company now, but they had these big buses that they had converted into a one-fits-all type of bus. They had a little, part of the bus was the camera department, part of it was grip, part of it was electric.
Cinemobile.
Cinemobile, that's what it was.
I think it
Thank you.
started on Man from U.N.C.L.E. or the one with Cosby and which was Bill Cosby and Robert Culp, I Spy. And they shot in Europe, and the creator was Fouad Saeed.
Yep.
Right? Am I
Yep.
right?
That's
Tell
exactly
us
right.
about that.
And that worked out for us. That worked out very well in San Francisco. The town gave us all sorts of perks, and whenever we would go, we would do probably 4 to 5 locations a day to really show the different parts of San Francisco. So we would have 4 to 5 moves a day. Whenever we would move, we had these police that were with us, these 2 guys, and we had sirens going, lights going, and everything. We had a personal escort from location to location, and that helped pretty good. And the Cinemobile was always parked close to the set because it was also the generator. So that worked out pretty well. Although once, I have to admit, I was in the dark room loading film, and I hear the Cinemobile start up, and he had to move it. And when he moved it around the corner or someplace, and when I got out and came out of the Cinemobile, I had no idea where the set was. And there was no one around, and I had to just go up and down hills till I finally found the set. That was a very strange experience.
Do you have any recollection of stories about Michael Douglas, Carl Malden, who starred in Streets of San Francisco?
Michael Douglas had left. He only did like the first 1 or 2 episodes of that first season, and then he left. And I think the guy's name that took his place was, I think it was Richard Hatch.
Yeah, that sounds
was
right
his
to me
name,
too.
Who was a very nice guy, but he was one of these guys that was incredibly clumsy. He didn't have a sense of space and what was right next to him, because he would go across the set and he would always run into a C-stand or something. Nicest guy in the world. He drove Carl Malden crazy, because Carl Malden is very much of a perfectionist.
Yeah.
and he arrives on the set knowing all of his lines, and he knows where the first mark is and the second mark is, and he will hit his marks without even looking at them. Richard Hatch was just a loose cannon. Just we never knew what he was going to do next, but he made up for it by being a really nice guy.
Yeah. Any directors or other crew members that that you recall standing out at all?
Yeah.
You were young, so it's sometimes we remember our first experiences more than others.
That's right. The only one that kind of sticks in my mind, and I can't remember his name, I think it was Richard, I want to say Wyndham, but I don't know if that's correct. But this particular director was also an editor. And when he directed, he was very frugal with his shots because he knew exactly what shots he needed and what shots he didn't because he was a director. And so we would be getting out of there. We'd have, after 10 to 11 hours, we'd be through. And everybody loved it because we could go out at night to eat at a nice place in San Francisco, and we'd be home by 6 o'clock at night, and that was really a lot of fun. So the directors would come in, after there'd be a couple more episodes, and they'd have the directors back again. So we were all making plans to go out and eat. And the first night, we worked till like 9 o'clock. Okay, it's one night. But this kept happening. And about the third night this happened, I went up to the director and I said, Richard, what we're working really late hours. I said, what happened? What's different about this episode than the other episode? And he just looked at me and said, you didn't have the conversation with Quinn Martin that I had. He told me that he would be the judge of where the cuts would be, not me. And that just stuck in my head of how kind of the power structure lies at least within TV at that time.
This brings us to the point of your hierarchy observation, that in TV, the directors do not make those kind of decisions. And
That's right.
Later on, as we all learn, more and more takes, not just one good take, 2 or 3 good takes. And I think that led us into longer hours. So did you, going back, with Streets of San Francisco, do you recall the hours in general? Did they try to cap it at 12 hours and not these 14, 15-hour days?
Yeah, it was pretty much 12 hours. They didn't run real late, and we didn't do a lot of night shots. There would be one night an episode, but they generally weren't. I don't know if we ever did an all-nighter. We might work up till midnight. They were 6-day weeks, so they were that. But we would have like every third weekend would be a 2-day weekend, something of that. So it was from the work standpoint, it was a very good show to work on.
So you were a camera assistant then. It was one of your first long-term projects. Mm-hmm. How many more did you have? How many more years before you ended up moving up, and how did that come
It was about 5 that I did before I moved up to operator, because I was the second on that show, and then I worked as a second for another year or 2, and then moved up to first. I moved up to first. It was interesting, on a show called Sybil, and the operator, who was the one who hired me, had a fight with the producer. And so he quit before he even got on the show. And they were, so then the first assistant moved up to operator and stuff like that. And then at one point they needed another assistant, and I was the second assistant, but they needed a first assistant because the first assistant again quit because this was a tough show to work on. So the DP and the assistant were sitting around talking about, well, who's available and who's not available and stuff like that. And I was standing right there, so I just said, I'll do it. And they both looked at me like, who are you? I mean, even though they knew who I was. And they kind of looked at each other and said, what do you think? And the operator says, well, let's give him a shot. stuff like that. So I ended up doing that show. I made it to the very last episode, and they fired me on the last episode. And the reason why they fired me, what they said was, well, I think it was true. The last episode, it was a very, very intense show. The last episode, they had a lot of kids in it. And filming children can be difficult because they don't have large attention spans, and they don't know what hitting a mark doesn't mean anything to them, and they rock back and forth. They're just always like loose cannons running around the set. And they wanted someone that would get the shot on the very, very first take. And I might not get it on the first take. So they replaced me on the very last episode.
Who hired you for Sybil?
Well, it was Richard Odessa that hired me, and I had met him. I'd worked on a show with him previously that was a kind of a strange show that I didn't understand and didn't really figure out what was going on until later in life. But it had to do with this job in Las Vegas, that this friend of mine, he was the one that was the editor that I had mentioned previously that helped me out a little bit. And he was shooting it. This show had to do with clowns and that rob banks or rob casinos or something like that in Las Vegas. This was back in the early 70s, so it's not the Las Vegas of today. So it was much more of a low-key Las Vegas back then. But we weren't the first people to work on the show. It had a lot of baggage. The previous crew, I don't know who they were. I'll try to make this fast, but they had quit because they weren't getting paid, which is a good reason to quit. So we decided to go in, and they hired a whole new crew. Why we thought we would get paid, we don't know, but that's another question. So we went in, and we did get paid for the first couple of weeks, and then the paycheck started drying up. And when it got to about 2 weeks of not getting paid, we said, we're out of here. So then we quit. So we're back in LA, and now, and on that, Richard Odessa was the first assistant, and I was the second assistant. So they got together again to try a third time to get this show, and they asked Richard to shoot it because the other guy, who was the DP on the part that I'd worked with, was doing something else. He wasn't available. So he said, we would come back, but we wanted to be paid our wages, the back wages before we even roll film. And they said, okay. They'd gotten some more cash infusion. So we went back and they paid us. And then, after about a week or so, the checks stopped coming once again. And the whole crew got together and rebelled against them. We decided, we all sat on the back of the camera truck, and we decided that the only way we would work for them, because they kept saying, well, the check's coming Monday, the money's going to be in the bank Monday. Then Monday would come, and they said, well, it's going to be Tuesday. So this kept going on for a week and a half, and we said, okay, we're not going to work unless you pay us our back pay plus every day at the end of the day in cash. You pay us our money. So they said, okay. So now this worked out for a couple of days. And they paid, and within that, and it was all signed and everything. This was like, some sort of work stoppage agreement and whatnot. We said that if we aren't paid, we get to keep the negative because the show was almost over, and if they got the negative, we would have no leverage over them. So they agreed to it. And we got a couple of days' pay where they just pay us at the end of the day out of this envelope full of cash. A side thing now is the director of the show, who is also producing it, and his new wife, who was the 18-year-old flyer at Circus. She was the first woman to do a triple in the air, and there were no other women at that time that could do a triple flip. They were newly married, and all of a sudden they show up both driving brand new Mercedes Benzes. But, we can't get paid. So, long story short, they couldn't come up with the money. And, of course, I had all the film because I was the assistant on it. Had it in my room. There were about 13, 14 rolls of film. So I went around, and they said, go back to the where our hotel was. You won't get any per diem, but you can stay there. Your room will be paid for, and you can eat at the hotel restaurant. That was it. That was the deal. While they got this so-called cash infusion. So I just said, I'm not going to do that. And I took it to all the people, and I said, does anybody want any film? And everybody's afraid to have film in their possession. So I ended up with all the rolls of film. Odessa did take 3 rolls of film. He took 3. So I had 10 rolls. And I take off. I loaded it in my Volkswagen bus and drove back to LA. I'm gone. It took them about a week to realize I wasn't there because they weren't filming. And I wasn't making any trouble for them or anything. About 2 weeks later, I get a call. And I said, who is this? And they said, I'm Detective so-and-so. I have with the Los Angeles Police Department. Says, I have Detective so-and-so and Detective so-and-so from the Las Vegas Police Department, and they have a warrant for your arrest. And I said, oh, that's interesting. I said, what did I do? And they said, well, you stole some film. And I said, I know what they're talking about, but I didn't steal it. It was a legitimate deal. And they said, well, meet us down in Hollywood and at this one vendor that Odessa had going. He owned a company that had some equipment and stuff like that. So we're going to talk to him because he had the other 3 rolls, and said, and we want to talk to you. So meet us down there. And he said, and bring the film with you. And I said, well, what if I don't? And the detective said, well, we have ways of finding it. We can get a subpoena and stuff like that. And I said, well, you'll never find it. I said, but I will bring it with me. I didn't want to push this too far. So the next day, I met them down in Hollywood at this little equipment house. And they showed me their badges and all this kind of stuff. And there were the 3 guys, and we stood out on the sidewalk. And I explained everything I've just explained now to them. And they stood there and they're writing in their little notepads and shaking their heads, up and down. Finally, when I got through with the story, they said, all right, thank you, Mr. Scott. And they turned around and started to walk off. And I said, what are you guys going to do? And the 2 guys from Las Vegas turned around and looked at me and said, we're going to go back and recommend that they pay you. So I said, tell them cash. That's the only thing I'll take. The very next day, there was a messenger there, or courier, or whatever you want to call him, with all the cash. I gave him that they owed me, not to the other people. They gave me the cash, I gave them the film, and I never heard from them again. I was the only one that got paid on the whole show. Now, what I figured out is the whole show must have been a scam. It was either mob money that they were laundering money, or it was a scam that's used a lot in motion pictures where people will go around and get a lot of cash from people who don't know what to do with the money they make. And it's mainly like doctors and dentists and things like that. They make a real good, they make good money, but they don't know what to do with the money. They don't know how to invest it. And it was kind of a Ponzi scheme where they just kept getting money from various people. And that's why they just kept getting these cash infusions. And also these people would come out to the set with their whole families and watch what was going on because they could mingle with the with the artists and stuff like that. So it was just all a whole scam. And I got to thinking about it. I could have gotten my knees broken on that show. I think I'm lucky I didn't, but I came out of it okay because, like I say, I was the only one that got paid. I just found it a very interesting story.
How old were you around then?
I was probably around 34, mid 30s. Mm-hmm. I got into the business late in life.
Uh-huh. What's the moral of that story for people coming up? Hang on to the film or the digital cards, or
Well, now it is
just get the
digital
heck
cards.
out?
No, I think the moral is, if a company can't pay you, get out of there. Leave. Don't. Just it's like the poker thing. Don't throw good money after bad. Don't work another week thinking that you're going to get paid. If you have leverage over a company, fine. But I was just on that show. That was just a quirk of fate that I had leverage over them. Because the reason nobody on the show got paid because they didn't have any leverage over them. Mm-hmm. They're not going to pay the costumers or the makeup people because so what?
Did that film ever see the light of day?
It came out for 1 week. It played at 2 theaters in this town. My wife and I went to see it one afternoon. We were the only people in the theater, and it disappeared.
What year?
This would have been about 72,
Okay.
73, along in there somewhere.
That was before you got in the union.
Yes,
In 77,
that was a
78.
non-union show.
Right. Yeah, that's less likely to happen union-wise, for
That's
sure.
why we have a union.
You were on Streets of San Francisco as an assistant for part of a season. And what happened after that? And who were you with?
I'm sorry, what was, go through
Streets
that
of San
question.
Francisco,
Oh,
that was later in the union. And the director of photography, was that Michelle Hugo or somebody else?
no, that was Michelle Hugo. Yeah.
And then what took place after that?
We came back to L.A. to do another Quinn Martin show. It was a very good show, but it was absolutely murderous. Anyway, it was a very, very rough show. One of the episodes, we had to work so long. I went to work at I think it was 7 o'clock in the morning, and I got off at 1 o'clock the next afternoon. We started out on location, we did stuff, we came back to the studio and finished up on sets. And the reason why they didn't cut it up and make another day out of it is they had like an air date in Canada of Friday night, and this was like Wednesday. So we had to get it done Wednesday. I mean, we think we had it bad. The editors had it worse than we did. And the show made it. It had a Friday night air date in Canada, and I think a Monday night air date in the United States, and it showed. They got it done.
Wow.
It was brutal. We had people would go off and take turns sleeping, over on different parts of the stage and stuff like that. And when they needed you, they'd go wake you up and bring you back over. And there's a lot of shows. There's a lot of people that have worked those hours. That's not like everybody has their stories like that.
Did you move up on Dial M for Murder
Yes.
in around 1981?
You've done
Is that
your
about the
research.
time you moved up?
That was it. That was my first real show of being an operator.
And who was in that?
Wish I could tell you.
Angie Dickinson,
Yes.
Christopher Plummer,
Yep.
Anthony Quayle, Michael Parks,
Yep.
to name a few. Yeah, you worked with some big names then. I have you working on a spelling show, Heart to Heart. And did you do most of that as an operator?
I forget when we came in on. I think we did the last either one season or 2 seasons of it. It had been going for a few seasons.
Around 1983, I have you.
And it was one of those deals where they got rid of the DP, and you know how that goes. I mean, it happens all the time, and people get tired of one another. So we came in and finished the last couple of years of it. Nothing changed or anything like that. When you go in, it's still the same. But that was a fun show. I really enjoyed that. Robert Wagner was great to work with, and Stephanie, she was very, very smart. It was there's one funny story there. It did involve her a little bit, but you know how you may not know, but back then they did phone conversations. There'd be a phone on the wall or on the desk or whatever, and you pick it up, and whoever we would be filming would say their lines, and then usually it was the script supervisor sitting off stage that would read the lines back. And you just hear this voice coming, out of the darkness, or the actor would. So they had in the kitchen of the house, the standard house that Robert Wagner and Stephanie Powers, where they lived, was in. The phone was on the wall there, like in a lot of kitchens. And I decided, I went to the effects people. I said, "Can you rig this phone up so that there can be actually someone speaking through it?" And they said, "Yeah, we can do that." I said, "Well, let's do that. Let's play a trick on Robert Wagner, and we'll have somebody speaking to it the reason why was because he would always, because he was always clowning around whenever we would do, on every single phone call that we would do, when on the first take, when the camera was rolling, go ring, he'd pick it up, he'd say hello, and then he'd turn to the crew while the camera was rolling. He says, "There's nobody here. There's nobody here at all." I said, "I have to do this. I have to understand that there's somebody here. I know there's this voice," the script supervisor's reading it, said, "but I have to, this job is harder than you think it is." He said, and he went through this whole spiel. He did it every single time. It was a running gag. So I decided to actually have someone on the other end. And everybody was in on it, and Stephanie got in on it. When she heard words, she said, "I want to be the one on the other end." So now we're rolling and everything. The phone rings. He picks it up. He says, "Hello?" And all of a sudden his eyes go like that. He takes the phone away. He said, "There's someone in here, and you should have heard what she said." To this day, I don't know what she said. And he told me later, he said that's never happened to him, where there'd been somebody on the other end of the line. And it's hard for me to believe that they hadn't rigged that up, because they could have. I mean, I know this was the 70s, but now, it's no big different.
In 1984, you were a second camera operator on Star Trek III, The Search for Spock.
Yeah, right.
What do you recall about that?
Well, what I recall is, because we're a second camera, it wasn't full-time second camera.
Okay.
And we would be, some days we'd work a full week, some days we'd work 3 days, some 2, depending on what they were doing. But that was before the days of having, 2 cameras on shows like that full-time. That whole concept was just kind of starting out. So we didn't do it full-time. There was one time that it was both the assistant, who was Norman Parker, and I were doing something else that day, and so we couldn't do it, and they called a different crew to come in and do it, which kind of annoyed us, because we kind of felt part of the show. But anyway, the paths didn't quite coincide. But on that particular day, they did this explosion in the in the ship, and the Enterprise, and it went bad, and the whole explosion came down, that curved hall. It came down that curved hall because they had misfigured about how to, about the direction of the explosion and the force of it, and it when it hurt the people, not seriously, but where our camera was, and so I missed it. So by not being there, I was not injured on the set of Star Trek III. We were sworn to secrecy because the big question was Spock going to come back? Now, and he was directing it.
Okay.
Leonard Nimoy was directing that episode, so he was always on the set. But no one knew whether he was going to come back in the episode or not. And we were sworn to secrecy because we knew because we had the script and whatnot. And I remember my wife asked me, said, "Well, does he come back?" And I said, "I can't tell you." And she got so mad. I just would never tell her. We laugh about it, and now it's no big deal. But it was fun to have a secret that you couldn't tell anybody.
Right. That was a feature?
Yes.
Yeah, Search for Spock. You went on to Ruthless People.
Yeah.
So that had some stellar stars. DeVito, Bette Midler, Judge Reinhold, Helen Slater, Bill Pullman, and others. Who was the director of photography?
That was Jan de Bont.
Okay, tell us.
Well, I had a love-hate relationship with Jan de Bont. He was extremely frustrating to work with because he wanted to do everything himself, but he was just, I felt, one of the most talented guys I had worked with. He taught me more about lighting a set and doing things than I think any other one person, because he never read the book about how you're supposed to do things. I think he was extremely talented, but he just always, he could never let you do your job. He wouldn't tell you to go over there, put the camera there, get this shot. He wanted to do everything himself. And that drove me nuts too. But I learned so much from him. Working with him was not easy. It was very high pressure. He made it that way. And I think he just thought that he could probably get better work out of people if he put pressure on them. I don't know if he actually articulated that or not to himself. But I guess I've heard of that theory before, but I don't know if it necessarily works. It kind of did with him, to be truthful. But whenever the call would come to do a movie with him, it was like, well, that's great. Oh, crap. You didn't know which way to go, because you're always glad to start the movie, but you're always glad when the movie ended too. Right. But when, the thing is, when you got off of a day after working with him, you'd be working with him, he's so focused, I always made the statement that if at any point in a movie he could have his choice of coming up with a cure for cancer or doing this shot better, he would pick doing this shot better, because that's what he did. And at night when you drove home from the set, you always had this sense that you had really accomplished something that day. Because in fact, you had accomplished something. One, you made it through the day, but he made it so that your work was significant somehow. So that's why I say I had a love-hate relationship with him.
Was he appreciative of the crew and what they did? Did you feel that at the end of the day or after a good shot? Or was, let's on to the next, on to the next?
Just on to the next.
Okay.
Yeah, his way of saying thank you was hiring you for the next show.
Die Hard, Nakatomi Tower.
That also was an interesting show. God, I don't know where to start on that. We shot all night. That was for like weeks and weeks, because we did shoot up in the tower at night. with, all of Los Angeles out there, and whenever the sun came up, we'd go home. I was actually the second camera operator on that. And then when they didn't need me, I'd go down and shoot second unit for them down in the garage. There was always, something to, somebody shooting somebody, so there always had to be inserts of gun firings and effects, bullet hits and stuff like that. So it was working on the first camera on that was a lot tougher than my job.
Who was the A operator?
Todd Henry.
Yeah,
really,
very accomplished.
Really
guy,
good.
for sure.
And it was just because the director, who I also can't remember his name, is they just, for some reason, the director didn't like him. It's one of those clashes of personality. And then they got Mike Ferris to come in.
That happens in our business all too often.
It does. And it doesn't, one of the things, going back to the training program, was Mr. Schwartz. I think his name was Phil Schwartz, or he was a DP, and he helped run that training program. His last name was Schwartz. And he gave a little speech on our little graduation luncheon that we had. And he said, there's something that they may not have told you while you were a trainee. He said, but in this business, you will be fired. He said, just admit it, and when it happens to you, just roll with the punches. He said, but you will be fired in this business. Said, sometimes it might be because you screwed up, and sometimes it will have absolutely nothing to do with your work. It's just somebody, for some reason, doesn't want you there, or they might fire the whole crew, and you just happen to be a member of the crew. I said, but you will get fired. And he said, if you don't get fired, he said, you should think about it, because that might mean that you're not pushing hard enough, and you're not trying new things out, and like the old phrase, pushing the envelope. Said, but now if you get fired too much, he said, then you might want to adjust your attitude or something like that. But he said, you will be fired, don't worry about it.
That's good advice for anybody to hear.
Yeah.
John McTiernan was a director.
McTiernan.
So you shot at nights because Bruce Willis was over at the Fox lot shooting Moonlighting during the day?
I can't remember if that was true. I know he had to do some things on Moonlighting. We shot it at night because they had all the, we were looking out the windows all the time.
Right.
And when we shot it on the location there, and they weren't going to go outside on the, the 30th floor and ND those windows.
Right.
I guess they could do it on the inside, but they weren't. There were just windows everywhere. That would have been a monster job.
Right.
So we just shot it at night.
How dangerous was it working on Die Hard with all the stunts and the bullet hits and all that?
Whenever you're firing guns and stuff like that, you have to be focused, and you have to be on your toes, and you have to pay attention to what's happening around you. And this leads into something that I was going to say about some other shots too, and other movies I worked on, is you have to, you just have to do your homework. I would always, on every effects shot, I would always go to the effects guys, and I would talk to them. I'd say, okay, now what is your version of what's going to happen? If there was a car stunt or anything like that, an explosion, because the DP will come up and say, get this shot. The director will say, do this, and I want you to follow it up or something. They'd give you the position to be in, but they don't necessarily have the knowledge of what is actually going to happen. They just know there's going to be an explosion. It's going to take place there. I would always, or a car jump or something like that. So I would always approach the effects guys and get their version of it. Then they would tell me, okay, This is going to be here. There's going to be bullet hits there. There's going to be firing from there, or a car is coming this direction, or it goes up this ramp, and there's a kicker at the end of the ramp, which makes it kick up unexpectedly. So if you're following a car doing a jump that's going up over a ramp with a kicker, at some point it's going to leap up like that, and you better have it in your frame.
How does one adjust their sleeping pattern to working all nights?
You just don't. You just, everybody has their own way of dealing with it, of sleeping at night, sleeping during the day and working at night. It helps to have, if you're married, it helps to have an understanding spouse, one who can keep the kids quiet, or will take the kids to the park, so you can sleep. If you're not married or you don't have a relationship, well, then you can just go to sleep, and you don't have to worry about anybody. But everybody adjusts to it their own way. It's not easy.
Moving on to Flatliners. You had Kiefer Sutherland, Julia Roberts, Kevin Bacon, and others. Anything you recall about that one? 1990.
I just thought it was a very weird show. I liked the whole premise of it. They changed the ending. The ending that you saw on Flatliners, if you saw it, was not the scripted ending. And the scripted ending, I felt, was much better. And I think, although I never could get confirmation from anybody on it, I think the reason why they changed the ending was so that they could have Flatliners 2. Because the Kiefer Sutherland character in the original script doesn't come back. Are you familiar with the show or the script or anything?
Yeah, they do they put people into suspended?
They put themselves.
Animation.
They basically stop the heart from functioning, and then they basically die. And what happens while they're dead? Where do they go? What happens to their being? And then before damage can be done to their body, they bring them back, and it affects the different characters in different ways. So, and in one of the dreams, it gets complicated because they all have varying reactions to being dead and have different views to being dead. And some of the characters start, because they do it more than once, they start fearing death. The Julia Roberts character starts fearing death. I forget exactly what her reaction was, but she now in her real life was starting to get really scared about death and dying. The Kiefer Sutherland character, when he's dead, there's a little boy in his past that I forget exactly what his relationship with the boy in his past was, but it wasn't a good one. It's like he either caused this boy's death or something like that, through an accident. I don't know if that's exactly right, but it was something that significant. So when Kiefer Sutherland goes back for the second time, I think, he makes amends with the boy and finds out that death is fine, that it's not a bad place to be. And he comes back just to tell the rest of the cast, don't fear death, it's okay. They changed that so that he comes back and he stays alive. Oh, excuse me. Then after he tells them that, he dies there on the table. And that's the end of the show, is with the Kiefer Sutherland's character's death. Well, that's not what you saw. He did come back to tell them all that, but then he still stays alive. And I just felt that didn't make as good of an ending. But I'm not a producer or a director or to make those decisions.
Let's lead into the next film that you worked on around 1991. It was released, Thelma Louise. Who was the director of photography on that?
On Thelma Louise?
Yeah.
I wish I could tell you.
Okay.
It's strange that I don't know it, but he was a British guy, and we didn't really have much to do with each other. Kind of kept to himself, and he just didn't really associate with other people that much. He was just I think and I don't know this. I'm just surmising this. Whenever you do a Ridley Scott show, he's the one that's lighting the set. And I don't care who you are, it's Ridley that lights the set. And I think this guy had worked with Ridley before, but I just got the feeling that he didn't like the way the power structure worked. And he just kind of showed up. That's the impression I got from him, because I didn't really see it. It was just like whatever Ridley wanted was fine, because the way Ridley lights sets is he has the DP light the set, and then when it's ready, he comes back, he sits behind the camera and says, looks out and he goes, what would happen if you take that light and move it over there? And of course, what he's telling you is to take that light and move it over there. It's not really a question. So they do it. They say, it feels a little strong on the back of my neck. Why don't you take that down a little bit? So he relights the whole set, and he would do that with every single scene. He lets the DP light it, then he comes back in and relights it to his satisfaction. And it works for him. He's actually, I think, very talented. I think he's one of the most talented guys I've worked with. And I would have to say my favorite director that I ever worked with, because he did allow the operators, he'd tell you what he wanted, but then he allowed you to go get it and stuff like that. So, and he took suggestions very well. One story that I liked about taking suggestions from anybody is, you learn quickly. Most DPs say that I'm getting a little off topic here, but most DPs say that they like suggestions, but then when you give them to them, you can see they don't really welcome them. And so what happens usually is, after about a week of giving somebody suggestions, or a week or two, and they just kind of shine them off, well, you kind of quit doing it. Which takes you out of the movie, and that's something as an operator you have to fight against, because even though you are being taken out of the movie like that, you still have to stay with it and give it your utmost, and fight that tendency to just relax and do things by the numbers. But getting back to Thelma Louise, we were filming just north of, I think it's Interstate 80 up in northern Utah. We were on the old road, and about a mile south of us was the interstate. And one of those afternoon showers had come, and the interstate, which you could see right over there, the cars were driving along, and they were shooting up through the rain that had fallen there. We weren't in the rain, just how those desert storms are. Laid down a whole bunch of water on the interstate. As they were going, they were kicking up big rooster tails, and they were backlit by the sun that was setting. So it was really a nice shot. I was just standing around there, and we were getting ready to do something, and this driver comes up to me and he says, "Hey, Mike." I said, "Yeah." He said, "See those cars going along?" And I look up and I say, "Yeah." And he said, "That would make a good shot if you put the T-bird out there and just put the doubles in it, and just as a montage shot, because they always want montage shots for stuff like that." And I said, "You're right." He said, "Why don't you go suggest it to Ridley?" And I said, "No, you suggest it." He said, "Oh, I'm not going to suggest it to you." I said, "You're the operator." I said, "No, it's your idea." And I grabbed him by the arm and said, "Here, let's go over and talk to him." So I took the driver over. I said, "Ridley," I forget the driver's name. He said, "He's got a nice idea." And Ridley said, "What is it?" So the driver told him what I just said about the shot, just take the T-bird and do that. And he just looked up and said, "You're right, that is a good shot. Mike, just get on it, go over there, grab one of the T-birds, put the doubles in it, and just send it up the camera with a long lens and just drive it across." And so he did, and it worked. I can't remember if it's in the show or not. That made the driver very, very happy, because it was, it was his suggestion, and something like that, to have a director of Ridley's caliber actually listen to a suggestion from the driver and to put it in action. He was the type of director that he wanted input from anyone. He told us at the first, he said, I want input. He said, I probably won't use it. He said, but don't be discouraged if I don't use your suggestions. He said, there might be one I can use.
So it's important that everybody feels connected, right?
No, I think so. I thought that's right. And very few people, though, actually do that. Some of them might do it naturally, but I just feel that very few of the directors and the DPs really engage the crew at large to do that. I think they appreciate the effort that you do put in and stuff like that, but it's not that they totally ignore you. But if you never made a suggestion, and the you means any member on the crew, I don't think a lot of them it would make any difference to them, because they're focused on their vision of things. A few, like Ridley, can focus on their own vision while still being, aware of suggestions from the crew and be able to put them into use to further whatever his vision is. One of the things that I started doing, both to get it across, to get the suggestion across, because I would think they were good suggestions because they were mine, and I always think my suggestions are good. But and it was a fun game to play with different DPs. And it was a fairly successful thing, but is to make them think that the suggestion was their idea to begin with. And one of the ways I would do that, and I would do it consciously, I'd go up to them and I'd say, remember when we were talking a little while ago about being low here and moving across? I think you're right. I think that would make a good shot. And they would look at me and they'd say, yeah, that's what we're going to do here, is be low and going across. And they had never, they had no idea that they were going to do that. They had another shot set up, and I would just get another camera and do it, stuff like that. Whereas if I'd gone up to them at the start of the shot and said, why don't we put a camera here low and go across, they would have said no. And I know they would have said no because I'd suggested that to them before. But if you make it their idea, then it becomes doable. A lot of DPs will be very angry at me for saying that, but I think it's true. And here's the whole thing. In a way, it is their idea, because they're responsible for what's on film, and they hired you, and they hired you for a reason. And if you can make them look better, even if they don't realize you're making them look better, that you're accomplishing something there. And that's why you're there, is to make the DP look good. I'm not there to make Michael Scott the star of this show. I'm there to make, Stephen was just in. So I'm there to make Stephen Poster look good, or Jan de Bont look good.
The stars on the show is a high caliber cast: Susan Sarandon, Gina Davis, Harvey Keitel, Michael Madsen, and others.
Brad Pitt.
And he made a name for himself in that small role.
He did.
Recollections there?
Oh yeah, it was funny. There was the scene the motel scene where they, after they've picked him up and whatever, and they spend the night in the hotel, and he and Gina Davis end up making out. Sitting outside in the car, there's a scene inside where, where it's where Susan Sarandon gets back with Madsen and whatnot. They're in the lobby or something like that, talking and making up. And Susan Sarandon and Brad Pitt are in the T-Bird. So we're just sitting in the T-Bird. I can't remember what we were getting ready to do, but we weren't really doing anything. And I was in the front seat, with a handheld camera looking back to the back seat, which was where Brad was just sitting there. And we weren't rehearsing, we weren't really doing anything. We were just kind of killing time for some reason. And I never tell this to an actor or anything, and I don't know if I've ever told another actor that. I just looked at Brad and I said, I've never really told an actor this before. I said, but I think you have a really good future ahead of you. Wow. And that's all I said. And he just said, well, thanks. He said, I hope you're right, But there was a power in him that, and where I saw it to begin with, there's one scene that just stood out. And it's just a small thing, is when they're arresting him and they're taking him upstairs, and he's going up the stairway in the police station, and Susan Sarandon's husband, the character, is coming into the station, and he's down in the floor of the lobby, and it's just him looking up at Brad Pitt going up, and there's just kind of looks back and forth of, because the husband had just gotten left, and now this is the new guy, because the husband is getting cuckolded and whatnot. So it's just really scripted for them to exchange looks and maybe a hey buddy or something like that. And if you remember the scene, Brad Pitt goes nuts, starts jumping up and down, saying, trash talking, saying, you such and such, and starts fighting the cops around him and whatnot. And there was so much power into just a nothing scene. It's just a throwaway. And he made it into something. And whenever you can take a throwaway scene and make it significant, I find that really appealing.
Mm-hmm. Did you ever work with him after that?
No.
How about Susan and Gina?
I did do a couple of days. I forget what show it was that Susan was in. And I was just an extra camera guy on it. It was later. It's like 3 or 4 years later. And I did do another show with Gina. It was Stuart Little too.
So back on Thelma and Louise, they're powerhouse actors for sure. And of course the name above the title. Anything that you recall about them?
Well, just besides the fact that they were just tremendous people to work with. I mean, the two girls were so professional and just put so much into the show, and their talent just was running all over the place. It was there was so much of it. Couple of things, I don't even know if you can use it in this venue here, but was one time it was up in Moab, and we were doing insert car work, and we were off to the side switching cameras around or lenses or something like that. Gina Davis and Susan Sarandon were just leaning up against the front of the T-Bird. And they were just talking, no one was paying them any mind. And we were doing flipping cameras around and stuff like that. So normally, just because of the luck of the draw when we were doing insert car work, my camera, which Ridley doesn't like A camera or B camera. He likes colors, a blue camera and the red camera. Okay. Because he says A and B denotes a hierarchy. Oh. And he says, I don't want a hierarchy. I want whatever camera's available with that lens on, whatever crew comes with it. He said, I expect each crew to be just as capable as the other one. He said, and I don't want to have to worry about it. And so he calls them the red and the blue camera, and I was, I think we were the blue camera. For some reason, on that particular shot there, the blue camera ended up being on Gina Davis's close-up. And Susan Sarandon all of a sudden notices, because she's very sharp, she notices everything. She says, "Hey, wait a minute, what are you guys doing?" And we all stop, and we don't really know how to answer that because we don't know what she's questioning. She said, "What's going on here?" I said, "The blue camera's shooting Susan's close-up. She not shooting mine." She looked over at Gina Davis and said, "Are you fucking the blue crew?" and Gina Davis says, "Maybe a blowjob or something like that." and of course, I just said in my wildest dreams, and that was all. But it was, now I don't know how you can work that into this show, but
There's no ratings. Don't worry about that.
but that's the way they were. They were just so incredibly delightful. They pitched while we were in Moab. They had a big bowling party for the whole crew that they underwrote. Drink as much as you want, eat as much as you want, bowl as much as you want. And they gave out awards to the bowler with the best accent and the bowler with the best buns and things of that nature.
Right. We talked earlier about the ending of Thelma and Louise. Couldn't be more definitive than that.
Yeah, and it was because of the ending of Flatliners that got changed, and it really upset me because I felt that Flatliners was a really decent show that had something unusual to say that I don't know if that subject had ever gotten into, about dying and coming back. I thought it was a very unique concept and idea, and the fact that they changed it from what I felt was a good ending to a more commercially acceptable ending did upset me. And even though that was many years before, when I was on Thelma and Louise, you always hear whispers in the wind and what's happening or what different pressures are going on from production. And I was worried that Thelma and Louise would keep its original ending because that was, to me, the best ending, which was where the two girls go over the side of the cliff. And we're sitting around on an insert car towards the end of the show, and I looked over at Ridley and I just said, "Ridley," I said, "is there any chance that they will change the ending of this show so that you can do a Thelma and Louise 2, because I've heard rumors of that?" And Ridley said, "Absolutely not." He said, "I will not allow that." He said, "I don't care what they say." He said, "I'm not going to film it. It's going to be this ending, and that's the way it's going to be." Mm-hmm. And that's the way it was. So I was reassured by that, and it was a pleasure to work with someone who, well, he had a lot of power, but nobody has ultimate power. But yet he was willing to go to the mat on that idea, and I respected him for that.
That last shot, I'm not sure if it was the last shot, but the shot that we're talking about, can you tell us about how that was put together?
They had to clean the complete car and clean all the grease from the various fittings, the U-joints and everything else. They had to clean the engine. They couldn't take the engine out because it would unbalance the car. I mean, yeah, you could add, I guess, sandbags and stuff like that, but they just, they had to, because the Park Service made them do that because it's going into the Colorado River, and that we were in national park territory there. So the Park Service made them, and we only had one car to do it because they said you could only do it once, and that's it. Mm-hmm. So, so it was a completely clean car, but the actual way they did the shot was they cabled the T-bird goes from the start, where it's heading towards the cliff, and it has to go about 40 or 50 yards before it gets to the end of the cliff. Well, it was cabled, so they had a cable pulling it, but it gets to the end of the cliff, where's the cable? How is it being pulled by the cable? So what they did was from the release point where the T-bird releases from the cable and goes over the edge and into the air, the cable goes back over to the mesa over behind it, and it's through a pulley system, and then it hits another pulley which redirects it a different direction, and on that, after it's redirected a second time, it's attached to the bumper of this high-powered pickup truck, which is on an asphalt strip that they put in. So it starts it and pulls it. The launch vehicle that pulls the cable starts up, and then it goes through a pulley, goes to another pulley, and then to the T-bird. That's how they did the shot. And then at the point where it launches, they've got, I think it was like a little explosive device to unlatch it from the cable. My particular shot was at the end of the runway, at the end of right on the edge of the cliff where they go over, just down low on a hi-hat. Well, I'm completely exposed, and there's nothing behind me but a drop all the way down. It's like 3 feet away, and that's where we are. So I had them put in a boulder right next to me so that I could pan with the car. But if the car came off track, because a lot of times when you're on a set and something like that, you have the drivers put a vehicle there of some sort, that they run into as a safety. But on this one, there's no way they could do that. So I had them put that boulder right beside me, and it worked. It was fine, because they said, well, what's going to happen? I said, well, that cable could come off. It could be lashed around. The way this is, it hits that pulley, and it could just go that way, and it comes across. It's just like a cable on an aircraft carrier deck. It's just going to come right into this position. So I'd really like to have that boulder there. And they said, okay. So they did, because they were very conscious of safety and whatnot. I mean, they didn't give me a hard time or anything like that.
What's your advice to people coming up and the experienced people who are going to watch this about taking responsibility for our own personal safety? What's your advice about taking responsibility for ourselves?
Well, I mentioned some of it before, which is if there's a stunt of any sort, you have to go and talk to the effects people and find out from them what's happening too, and talk to everybody who's involved in the physical part of the action. And I want to get into that a little bit more in relating to my time on Twilight Zone. But before I do that, I'll relate a time when I didn't do that well enough, which was on Die Hard. And we were doing a shot where no, it was not Die Hard. It was Lethal Weapon 3, I think it was. So we're down close to where they were constructing what is now the 105 freeway, I think, close to LAX. And so we were using a lot of that for some of the motorcycle stuff and also some of the chase. So anyway, Jan comes up and says, "You're here on a long lens, and when the cop car comes through, you take him through and on up this way." Oh, no, yeah. So you have to take the cop car through up to here, and then then this cop car runs into another cop car. I think that's the way it went. So, okay. So I just went up there and expected that to happen. So, oh God, I can still remember it. I'm set to go, and the sirens are going, and everything is happening, and everybody's yelling and screaming, and a bunch of cars are starting up, and I can see them out of my other eye, and here comes a cop car, and he comes into the scene, and I take him up, and nothing happens. And then I hear a crash. It was the second car I was supposed to take through. totally missed it. And someone might say, well, you weren't told enough information. That is true, but it's partly my responsibility to talk to other people, and I didn't go talk to the stunt guys. And the reason why I didn't go talk to the stunt guys, because I was up here and they were down there, and I just didn't do it. I got lazy, and it bit me right in the butt. And that's what teaches you a lesson to, you always have to find out from all the other people what's going on.
Basic Instinct.
Oh,
Did
boy.
you do, in IMDb it shows you as doing Los Angeles. I know they shot up north a lot, but it just says Los Angeles. Were you on full time?
Yeah, that was the A operator.
How was that? It's a great movie. It's a fantastic movie.
I think it was too. I thought Sharon Stone was fantastic in that movie. I think she has a lot of talent. I think she's made some poor choices of roles that didn't do. It was, put it this way, they didn't do much for her career, and I just think the actual shows weren't that good. But we won't get into that. There was so much sexuality involved in that, and the tension, the sexual tension between her and Michael Douglas was phenomenal. Some of the things Jan did was phenomenal. The lighting, some of it, I really thought that was one of his best shows for lighting. Again, high pressure, intense, and all that stuff.
You enjoy working with Michael Douglas?
He was fine. I enjoyed working with him. It was interesting because I worked with him again on a day call on, well, it was a David Fincher movie, and I can't remember, the Game or something like
Yeah,
that.
The Game.
And it was just for like for like a couple of weeks. They were doing some added footage, some added footage. They needed to pump up some scenes and do some things. But I hadn't seen him again. Him meaning Michael Douglas. And when he came on the set, he saw me, and I was just on a camera, over there. And he recognized me and came over and said, "You were the guy on Basic Instinct, was it?" And I said, "Yeah, that's right." And he said, "Well, nice to meet you again." Yeah. Stuff like that. And I was impressed by that he actually, they actually remembered. It was, I had no problem with him. He was a nice guy to work with.
And Sharon Stone, why don't we talk about that scene and tell us. There's stories that she knew what she's doing and didn't know what she was doing. So what, you have a recollection there? Nobody knew what the scene was going to turn out to be.
Yeah, it was interesting because I actually had a call from a LA Times reporter or some reporter for some magazine or something after that, calling me to get my knowledge of did it happen? Did she know or didn't she know? And I just said, well, why don't you ask her? I wouldn't tell him. I wouldn't tell the guy, the reporter, because I figured if she wanted to tell, whatever they wanted to say, that's up to them, whether she knew about it or not. But that was right close to that, for the when that show opened up and whatnot. I think the circumstances now are a little bit different for this type of venue, so I think I can go into it. But let me put it this way. It's scripted. It's in the script that she's not wearing underwear. It's a story point. They talk about it later when he drives her home and it's raining, and he pulls up in front of her house, which is this fabulous mansion, and he in San Francisco, and he says something about, "I don't really know that much about you." And she looks at him and says, "Well, I don't have any underwear on." And she opens the door and leaves. And that's the end of the scene. He's sitting there going, like that. Great scene, great lines. It's scripted, and we shot it the way it was.
Was that your camera?
Yeah. That one because there were some nude scenes later on that I didn't shoot. They were, Jan did those. The ones, there were a lot of them with Michael Douglas and Sharon Stone in bed. Those he did himself. He would do certain things himself. And I think also that Michael Douglas, not that he had anything against me, he just didn't, and it wasn't hers. Michael Douglas didn't want anybody else in there.
Yeah, I mean, it comes a point where sometimes I call it a closed set, which means there's fewer people.
Yeah.
I always thought it was kind of funny in later days when there's monitors. There are monitors everywhere for a closed set, but...
Well, that's right. And I was on another show with her, The Specialist, and we were in Miami. And there's a scene where her and Sylvester Stallone make out. So, and she's going to be completely naked in it. She went around to every single person on the set and asked them what they were doing, what was their function on the set, why were they there, and if they didn't have a function, she ran them off. And she had, and that was the days of monitors, and she made sure that none of the lines were running out to the garage where all the drivers could watch and stuff like that. And all the people that didn't have anything to do with the scene were out there watching. She made sure that there were no cables going out there and everything else. Now, I don't know whether she was 100% successful or not, but I assume she was. And she was pretty smart about that stuff, which was kind of funny because I was on this kind of a balcony up above shooting straight down on the lovemaking scene. And she was asking people what their jobs was, and she got to me and she says, "Oh, Michael," she said, "I don't care about you. You've seen everything anyway." She said, because I'd done Basic Instinct with her.
Right. Let's jump ahead, and there's gaps here, but I invite people to look at your IMDb and learn more. But let's talk about, let's jump ahead to Speed.
Speed.
Yeah, Lethal Weapon 3, is there anything, I don't want to skip over that in case there's something you want to relate to the audience.
No, I just didn't, Danny Glover and Mel Gibson were fun to work with. I know Mel Gibson's had some problems lately with his reputation and whatnot, but from a personal level, he was fun to work with. But I'm a guy, so that might make a difference.
Speed. That was a dynamic movie. I think everybody loved it. How was operating a camera on Speed?
Stressful. Physically brutal. We were inside that bus when we were doing the bus scenes. Had it rigged up so we could do bungee cams on a dolly. You know how the handrails are in a bus, where you can grab hold of them? Well, they made the handrails on that bus so that there was all the supports were underneath and not on top. And so they put a little rollers on this, a little plate, and then they hung the camera on bungee cords down below, and then you could go shots up and down and like that. And sometimes we get 2 or 3 cameras in there on different plates. And we were all bouncing around and bumping into one another. The bus is turning, making sudden moves and slamming us from one side to the other. We actually did a jump with the bus where the bus went over this small ramp to get the feeling of being inside the bus, and that was the stupidest thing I ever did, was consent to that. And I was at the back of the bus right over the rear wheels, where the rear wheels come down and it just compresses your spine. I would go home at night with bruises all over my body from being inside the bus. It was just, it was brutal, but there was this fascination about it that it was brutal, but it was fun to do. It was exhilarating to a certain extent. Working out at the airport, we're around all these planes. I learned a lot about LAX and about emergencies they have and stuff. We used to have to practice emergencies. We had to practice, getting everything off the field in 60 seconds. And we just have like fire drills. So they'd say, okay, everybody off. You just grab whatever was around you, grab a camera, grab sandbags, grab whatever, and just run it back to the hangar. And then there was a guy from LAX out there timing us. We had to do it in, I forget if it was 60 seconds, but it was something close to that. And once or twice it actually came into effect where we had planes coming into LAX. One was a Delta Airlines flight that came in. They couldn't get the nose wheel down. And it flew over low, right over us, and the people in the tower had to look. And it wasn't down, but it went around, and they finally got it down, and it landed, but all the trucks and stuff were out there. Another one had lost all of his hydraulics, so they had to rely on the brakes, and they almost caught on fire. They were just, and I asked one of the LAX guys, I said, how often does this happen? I said, because you never hear about this on the news. And He says, this happens every day.
There was a shot where there's a baby carriage and it gets hit. And you told an interesting story I'd like you to relate to our audience about what worked and what didn't work.
Yeah, there was a shot in there where the bus is going down a street, and it's, of course, running through red lights and everything else. And it comes upon this intersection, and there's a lady pushing a baby carriage that's not paying any attention because she has the right of way. She's got the walk signal, and she starts walking across pushing the baby carriage. The stunt is that the bus hits the baby carriage, but there's no babies in it. It's a homeless person pushing a baby carriage that's full of aluminum cans that they've collected to go recycle. So that's basically the stunt right there. And we film it from all different angles, wide and tight and stuff. And Jan just uses so many. If he's got 8 cameras, he's going to have them out on the set, either locked off or whatever. He's going to be using it. So he wanted a close-up, a very close-up of the bus hitting the carriage, and he wants it from the side, almost like the POV of the lady that's carrying it, but it's not necessarily a POV, but it's from her position, not carrying it, but pushing it. But it's a tight shot, and the way they've got it rigged is they're going to do it with a bus that has the baby carriage attached to the front, and when it hits the certain mark where we're filming it, it's by compressed air launched out in front of it as if it had been hit. So now the operator, which wasn't me, thank God, was down with like an Airy 2C with an eyepiece that doesn't move. I think he was looking through one of those periscopes or some strange thing like that. It's just the worst possible conditions he could have been put in. And he's supposed to get the shot, a tight shot of that happening. So he's on a set frame. So all of a sudden the bus is going to enter this frame and this thing's going to get launched. And he is, top to bottom carriage. That's how tight it is. And follow it down the street with all the cans spilling out from it. We had playback and video monitors on all that stuff then, but that was the one camera that didn't have a video tap, of course. The one that actually needs the video tap doesn't have one. After the shot, Jan asked, how was it? And the operator said, well, he said, I had it to start with, and when the shot ended, after I panned around, I could see that I had it at the end. I have no idea what happened in between. Jan got very annoyed at this. And so we did it again, same answer. And then the third time, he asked me, he said, Mike, get down there and you do the shot, as if I'm supposed to be the great savior. All I see is this set frame, and all of a sudden I just see the carriage goes firing through the frame, and there's no way you could follow it. I was completely taken by surprise. They said, how was it, Michael? And I said, I totally missed it. And they grumbled, and we went on, to the next shot. So next day in dailies, the operator was not asked to come back. But he showed up for dailies because he wanted to see if he'd gotten the shot or not. So he was there, which I thought was very courageous of him. And the shot comes up, his shot comes up, and the bus comes into frame. The bus is launched through the compressed air, and it fires away from the bus, and he's right on the carriage, and he follows the carriage perfectly down the street with a set frame at the end. It's an absolutely perfect shot. From behind me, I heard someone say, "Michael, was that your shot? Good shot." And I said, "No, sir, it wasn't." I said it was, and it was the other camera operator who had not been asked back. He'd gotten the shot perfect. And but that's another indication of getting fired for no reason at all.
Right. So Michael, you touched upon safety. We can never really talk about safety enough. You mentioned talking to effects people, making sure that things are the way they should be. Some things fall through the cracks, of course, and communication is key in any business, especially in ours, to get what the filmmakers desire. Any instances in your career that you can talk about that bring you back to a time where there were difficulties in the communication process?
Yeah, one very significant one is I happened to be called in just for an extra day's duties on Twilight Zone, the one where they had the crash of the helicopter, and I was called in on the night or for the night that they had it, and I was there operating one of the cameras when the helicopter crash occurred. Beforehand, my position, well, if you remember the show, if you've seen it, there's a creek running through, and there's a big bluff, almost a dirt cliff to one side of the creek that's probably 30 to 40 feet tall, something like that. And they said my camera was to be at the top up there, just right on the edge. Looking down on the scene, just kind of a standard wide shot. There's going to be explosions and stuff happening, and I got to keep all the trucks out on the camera trucks and everything out from the top of the frame, and just bring the helicopter in and see what goes on. So the first night didn't come off because they didn't get to the scene. They were doing other stuff in a different part of the area. So we didn't really get to the shot till the second night, so I was hired back. I did go up to the effects guys to say, okay, I said, now I'm going to be right up there on the edge of that cliff, and I pointed to them where I was going to be. I said, do you tell me what you can about the mortars and what are the dangers of me being in that position? And one of the effects guys looked at me and kind of nonchalantly said, "That's going to be your position?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "Well, I hope your insurance is paid up," was his comment. Which he meant it as a joke, of course. I don't think he really felt that there was a danger up there. Also, it turned out there was. But anyway, I went around, got where everything was going to go off and what was going to happen, where the mortars were, and things of that nature. So at least I was informed while I was up there. And I knew there was a couple of mortars directly below me that were shooting straight up. I didn't know how high they would go. The effects guy said they could get up to my level, which in fact they did. So cut to the second night when they're doing the shot, and now it's starting, and we're rolling cameras, and the helicopters come in, and there's mortars going off, and there's gunfire, and all sorts of stuff happening. And then there's the mortars right underneath me, right underneath the camera, fire, and the explosion, the fireball travels right up the side of that cliff, comes right up to my level, and engulfs my camera. Now, those fireballs, those effects fireballs, they're not that dangerous as opposed to, say, a gasoline explosion or something like that, or an actual explosives explosion, because they're just lit, I think, by gasoline to start with, and they explode, and they have this soot that just goes up, and they're not as powerful as they look. So it just engulfed the camera, and other than maybe a few singed eyebrows, I was fine, and got warm for a few seconds. But while all this was happening, a lot of the noise died down, but I could still hear this, and I actually took off from the camera. I closed the eyepiece, locked it, pointing down, closed the eyepiece, and went up the hill, because I was attached off on them. I actually had 2 ropes, because I'm really a chicken. I had them tied to 2 different trees, and I headed up the hill to safety, because it was a pretty steep hill that I was on. And I could hear this one noise, this kind of a high-pitched whine going, even though they yelled cut. And I couldn't figure out what that was, so I went back down to the camera and looked down and saw the helicopter down in the water, and the bodies float around in the water that had just been cut into pieces by the helicopter blade. And the whining I heard was that the turbo, the jet engine of the helicopter still going. And it was pretty traumatic scene, pretty traumatic happening. I mean, obviously, from a personal standpoint, I know I went home. They didn't get around to getting up to me for about 3 or 4 hours up there, because we had to load all the stuff in. They had to get a truck by a back road up there, and we were the least of their problems at that point. I think that the fact that I had talked to the effects guys helped out, because I was prepared for what happened. And later, I was being interviewed by the district attorney about it, because the operators had to go in for interviews and whatnot, and to see what our version of the story was. And I asked the district attorney why the helicopter pilot was being charged, because I didn't feel that he had necessarily done anything wrong, and why was he getting charged for this crime? And she said, because he didn't walk the set. He didn't go find out where all the mortars were. He never went on the set. He just kind of flew in and flew out, or that was his plan. Said he wasn't prepared, and it was what he didn't do that caused him to be charged with a crime. So you can do with whatever you want with that information, but just pay attention when you're on a set that could be dangerous. Another story along that lines is, and I'll keep it short, but I was to do a shot of a car on Dynasty. It was a limo going around a corner, and it slides down this berm that's only about 15 feet. And the car is only supposed to go down about halfway down the berm, and it's just supposed to get banged up, because the 2 stars are in it. I mean, they wouldn't be in the stunt, of course, but in the story they are. So it can't be a spectacular shot where there's this big crash, because that would change the whole storyline. My camera was down below shooting up, and I didn't like that position, so I went and said, why can't I fall back on a much tighter lens? I said, this is just really bad. They said, well, the car is only supposed to come halfway down. And I said, well, we all know that can go wrong. And the stunt coordinator was standing right there, and he said, well, if my guys do it wrong, said, I'll knock them flat. And I said, well, that doesn't help me out if they do it wrong. But they were agreeable, and I moved the camera back about 30 feet and shot it from there with a longer lens. Well, when we started the shot, I could hear the whine of the engine starting, and it's coming a lot faster. We can't see it come till it hits the berm and rolls over. the side of the road. And I could tell from the whine of the engine, it was going much faster than it should be. Long story short, it comes over and goes a little bit airborne and lands directly on where my camera was. That was it. If I hadn't moved back, I wouldn't be sitting here talking to you now. So everyone has to take responsibility for their own safety. And yes, there's a chance if you rock the boat that you won't be asked back to that show, or you won't be asked to work with that particular cameraman or that director or whatever again. But my answer to that is, why would you want to work with this particular cameraman or director or company again if something like that, if they won't ask you back after becoming concerned about safety? So we do have to take the responsibility of the safety on ourselves. We really do. And I just wish, there are times when I didn't do that, and I wished I had have and had stood up for something. That would just be my big warning for everybody to do, to have the fortitude to walk off a set and to take whatever the consequences are.
Flashing forward to 1996, along the same lines, Twister. Now that's a effects-laden feature film for sure. Propeller blades, debris flowing every direction. How did you feel on that show?
Yeah, I was on that. I was not on the A unit. I was on the B unit, and so we did do a lot of stunts and various things on the B unit, but that wasn't. There were some times when it was manageable insofar as the safety goes. You just had to be aware and know that stuff was blown around and wear protective clothing or furniture pads, or make sure the grips had plastic built around you or whatever. And you just had to you had to be really aware of stuff, because there was stuff going on. There were these machines that made ice that spit it out in front of the Ritter fans. And a lot of times the ice would be hitting you for hail, and it was ice, and when it hit, it hurt. So you just had to be aware of it. Insofar as safety goes, I've been on other shows that had much less safety than that.
So that being Twister, you seem to find your share of action and stunt work, and Jan de Bont again, right?
Yeah.
He direct that?
No, he was the DP on it. No, wait. No, he did. He directed Twister.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Well, Michael, that speaks to your value as a crew member, and in his eyes as well, because he did invite you and hire you to be on a number of shows. So that's a good testament to how you can get along with somebody who can be difficult, but still is brilliant, and he keeps bringing you back. Was that the last show you worked?
I don't know if it's the last one. They also did Speed 2.
Right.
So in all of those, any action show you go on like that, whether explosions and car stunts or motorcycle stunts or train stunts, whatever it is, they're dangerous, and you just have to be really aware of that.
You worked on End of Days. Did you do a lot of work on that? That was a Schwarzenegger film?
Yeah, I came in about a third of the way through, and ended up as the B camera operator on it.
Uh-huh.
It was, and I think I'd talked with you about this before, and I couldn't remember the DP's name because he also directed it. It was Peter Hyams, right?
Right.
Yeah, that's who it was. And I enjoyed working with him. He's kind of an odd guy. I really liked him, and he's focused, And he was very good about taking suggestions. If you could suggest something to make it better, he would use it because it made him look better.
Right. You worked on U.S. Marshals. Was that the follow-up to The Fugitive?
Yes.
With Tommy Lee Jones?
Yeah, that was.
You're smiling.
Well, that was fun. We were in Chicago for a while, and then down into, where were we, Tennessee, and places down the Mississippi or whatever river we were on. We had a set built inside of some sort of an old warehouse in Chicago, where we filmed the interior of a 727 that had crashed. And that's, of course, what lets the people loose at the start of the show, the prisoners. But we filmed the exteriors down on the river. That was south. I think we're in, I don't know, Indiana or something in there, one of those states. And inside, they had the interior of the 727, and it rotated around so that it ended up being upside down. And then, because when it turned upside down and started filling with water, that's when all the action starts, and the prisoners are trying to get out of their shackles and screaming and yelling, and everything's going on. So it was an interesting shot where it was on a remote on a crane sticking into the airplane fuselage, and it was protected from the water, of course. But as the fuselage turns, the camera goes with the fuselage, so that your orientation, the audience's orientation to the audience, always stays the same. And to do that, to take that around, at some point, it's a technical thing, but at some point, because you're on wheels, the wheels become opposite. So that when you turn the wheel the way you'd normally do it, it doesn't work. So what we did, and it ended up working pretty good, was at some point, I just had one of the other assistants change the polarity of the rotator, the ring that goes around the camera. And then it changes it back so that you can move the camera and tilt and pan and tilt the camera as you see it, not as you know that it's going, but as you see it, if that makes any sense.
Sure. Speaking of camera assistants, you were a camera assistant. You worked many years as an operator with camera assistants. What's that symbiotic relationship? What makes a good assistant in the view of in your view as a camera operator?
Well, I had the luck to work with many really, really good assistants. One of them being Cal Roberts was one of my favorites, maybe the favorite, but there were some other really good assistants too. I would say, besides the actual getting along with assistant and working in a cooperative manner so that you get the shot done as best as possible, as quickly as possible, is there were some assistants who, and Cal was one of them, who you didn't really need to talk to. You didn't really need to say anything to, and you didn't need to be aware of focus because he always had it. It was just so nice to be able to concentrate on operating and framing and not have to be looking for one that falls a little soft here, a little soft there. That's, from a selfish standpoint, that's what I always look for in an assistant. And there weren't that many. Some do. They would just come in and they just did their job perfectly, and I just didn't have to worry about them.
And what's become ubiquitous these days is remote focus, and not always having the camera assistant, camera technician near us as operators in case we change our mind on something, on on a next take and wanting to do something else and have them be aware of it if they're in a different location from right next to the camera. You didn't experience too much of that toward the end of your career, did you?
Yeah, that was just starting the phenomena of the camera assistant being on the other side of the room and not next to camera was just coming into vogue as I left the business. That I'm glad that I didn't have to cope with it that much. I did a little bit, but not that much. Having the camera assistant right next to camera just helped so much to me to make the shot better, because I could, whisper things at him into the focus, come a little closer, go a little farther away, or I could reach up and maybe grab the focus and move it just a slight bit and whatnot, and we wouldn't even have to mention anything to the director or the DP, because it was done fine, and it all worked fine. When they're on the other side of the room, you can't do that. I don't question their reasons for being over there. The way shots are done now with remote focus and everything has changed. And now, and this didn't even happen while I was operating, now they focus off the monitor. I'm not quite sure how that works, but I guess it does. But I have to admit, I'm glad I didn't have to deal with that issue.
You retired about 10 years ago or
Yeah.
so. We're in 2019. In 2018 or 2008, you did Pineapple Express as a second unit operator. Was that in Hawaii?
That's a very strange credit of mine, and I don't know how that got there. Yes, I did, but I didn't do anything in Hawaii. I just did some second unit stuff over here on stage, I think over at Fox, I think it was. And was it Fox or what is now Sony? I can't remember. Anyway, it was one of those in Culver City. And I didn't really work on it that much. And somehow that credit has followed me around, and I really don't deserve it. I worked on it for a couple of weeks. I don't really remember much about it or anything. And another show that I get credit for, that I don't deserve credit for, is Donnie Darko. That was David Comides that was the A operator on that show and did all the Steadicam and was the A operator. I came in about halfway through the show to do B camera work and then to go out and do some, second unit work, simple stuff, run-bys and night shots and stuff like that. But I did work on a lot of Donnie Darko, and enjoyed the show. And that was another one where I really enjoyed the script. I thought it was a wonderful script. But I wasn't the camera operator on it.
There's a story, something about M&Ms or something along those lines. Tell us about that.
That's just kind of a funny set thing. When you work on these shows, you have a lot of spare time on your hands. And when you have spare time on your hands, you're dangerous. So, and I think I was. So, on Daddy Daycare, we were filming it over at Fox. And there was a deal at that time that M&M's was having a contest to where there was a bag of M&M's that was nothing but purple M&M's in it. And if you got that bag, you could call a number and there'd be a code word on the side of the M&M's bag and you'd win a lot of money, like $100,000, $10,000. I don't know what it was. It was a lot of money. Actually, I think it was in yen, so I think it was some sort of promotion along those lines. Well, everybody on the set was always going over to craft service and seeing if they could get, the good M&M's package. Well, the craft service guy would also empty a lot of the M&M's out into a big bowl so you could just grab a handful anytime you wanted to. So what I started doing was collecting the purple M&M's and not eating them. I put them in a baggie. And after I got enough to put into an M&M's bag, I opened up the top very carefully, took all the M&Ms out, and put all the purple ones in. And so and I was there was one of the guys, I think he might have been the first AD or maybe the second AD on the show. I'm not sure. But we were always kidding back and forth about we're going to get fat eating all these M&Ms to see who gets the purple M&Ms. So I took this bag that I had rigged and I stood beside him and purposely opened it kind of where the bag was up high so he'd notice it. And I started eating the M&Ms and where he could see me, and he was looking because we'd been joking about it for like the last 4 days. And all of a sudden he says, "Boy, you got a lot of purple ones there." And I said, "Oh, yeah, I do." And I reached in and took a couple more out and I said, "These are purple too." And he said, "Those are?" And I said, "Yes." And long story short, we open up the bag and it's nothing but purple M&Ms. And everybody's running around the set. Of course, I'm prodding them to do so. "Michael Scott, he got the purple M&Ms. He won the purple M&Ms. He actually won it." And they came up to me also at that time and said, "You should call that in." I said, "What do you mean?" They said, "Call it into the number." So I read the side. So I got my phone out and called it into that number, but I really didn't punch send. And so I faked a whole phone conversation talking to the person at the other end about that I had the proper M&M's bag. And I gave him the right code word and everything. And so this friend of mine, Norman Parker, was the assistant on it. And he was kind of in on the deal. And so I handed the phone to him and said, "Here, Norman, listen to him. I'm not telling a lie. This is the truth." And he took the phone and he listened a little bit and he said, "You're right, they are." I said, "You did win it." And it got the whole story about me winning the purple M&Ms got around to production. Everybody was so actually excited about it that I got a little embarrassed because everybody actually, and word spread fast, up to the production office and everything. And I finally had to let them up and tell them, no, I'd salted the mine, that I really hadn't. They were a little bit pissed, but it was a fun bit.
Fun and games on the set. What was your last production that you did before you hung up the wheels?
It was Fast and Furious. It was in the order of things, the way they name them. It was the fourth one. And it was just a fun show. It was just an effects show, car show, a lot of pretty easy in one respect because the poor second unit did all the night shots and all the plates and everything. Then we went in on stage on green screen and did all the close-ups with all these, jigs and mounted cameras and stuff like that up against green screen. So we filmed all the night scenes in day, of course, on the set. So it was actually pretty easy. And almost everything was done off of remote cameras and, remote controls and stuff. So it was a fun show. It was a satisfying show to go out on. The people were great. The cast was great. It was just fun to work on.
Now, you knew what your last day was going to be.
Yeah.
When you got up that morning, how did you feel?
I felt good. It was, a little bittersweet. I've enjoyed my retirement. The retirement is really nice. I miss the camaraderie. I miss the bullshit back and forth with your friends, the assistants, the dolly grip, all the grips, the electrics, and the boom guy, and all that. It's a lot of fun, and I really miss the call. And the call is when you're sitting around having coffee, like at 9 o'clock in the morning, and your phone rings and you answer it, and it says, "Michael." You say, "Yes." I said, "This is," and it's a DP, and it said, "I'm doing a show and we're doing it in Alabama or something. I'm doing a show coming up in a month. Are you interested? What's your schedule like?" And then you go from there. You negotiate and you either get it or you don't get it or whatever. But the call was fun. It really leaves you with those, what are they called, endomorphins or whatever the chemical is in your
Endorphins?
brain, What is it?
Endorphins?
Endorphins, I guess it is. Yeah, endorphins. And your brain's just filled with those. And your body just feels so good after the call. There's something about the call that was just really attractive. And I do miss the call, and I miss the camaraderie with friends. I don't miss the work. I enjoyed the work. I had a great career, one that I can't gripe about at all. Ups and downs, but everybody has those. If you don't have the downs, the ups aren't as good. So you always have to have something to measure it to. But I really don't miss it. I've said this before. I don't miss being in a ditch at 8 o'clock, at 4 o'clock in the morning with rain dripping down the back of my neck and knowing that I've got shots to go when the sun comes up. That I don't miss at all. And I remember a time when I would drive down the street of L.A., and there'd be you go by a shooting company, and they were shooting something in a store, usually a bar or something like that. And you'd see them all, the lights going through the windows and stuff. And I used to stop, and I'd go in to find out who they were and who was shooting. Then I got to a point where I didn't really stop, but I would always be excited, wonder who was doing that show. Now it just doesn't even bother me one way or the other. And I'm not saying that in a bad way. It just means that there comes a time in your life that you need to move on to different things. My body wouldn't let me operate much anymore because of all the handheld stuff that was becoming very much in vogue. My body got to where I couldn't carry a camera around for, 27 and a half minutes or whatever a hard drive is. It's a long time. I felt that there were other people that could do that. And I'm not being demeaning about that. It's just I just got to a point in my life where that wasn't attractive to me anymore.
And in closing, you've been a member of this union for, a number of decades. What does being a union member mean to you?
Well, it means everything. It means protection. It means having a wonderful health plan. That is worth so much that it's incredible. That takes whatever money you're making and doubles it, I think, your salary practically. That probably doesn't pencil out to be true, but it's protection against abuse from unscrupulous producers. I think most producers are honest and want to have a good product out there and will take advantage of you if they can, but most of them aren't out to really grind you into the ground. Some are, and the union protects you against those, but everybody has to pull together. And again, it's like the safety thing. You have to be willing to call in something that you think is not right, because it'll either help you or your crew, or it might help someone else down the line. On the show where the lady assistant, I don't know her name because I was out of the business by then, was killed on a trestle. I've shot on trestles before, on train trestles, on active train trestles. And there was always a representative from the railroad company that was there with you with about 5 walkie-talkies on his belt, and he was communicating with every engineer within a 100-mile radius, letting them all know we were there, and with the headquarters and the guy that sits in front of the computer screens monitoring what train is where. We always had those with us. If someone previously that was working with that particular production company had spoken out and gotten them in trouble for abusing rules, maybe they wouldn't have abused these particular rules on that day. You can't say for sure. But speaking up now and maybe, like I said before, not being asked back, it could save lives to do that. Not only your own, but other people too. So I used to actually do role playing where I'd stand in front of a mirror and say, I'm sorry, I can't do this shot. And once you do that, role playing is actually a very useful tool. And once you do that and you find yourself in that situation, it's easier to say those words if you've done it before.
Wonderful interview. Really enjoyed having you on behalf of Local 600 and the Heritage Committee. Is there anything that you think we could have touched on a little bit more? Anything that you'd like to say to clarify, change, or are you happy with the today's interview?
No, I'm happy with it. I mean, I could sit here and tell war stories for another 3 hours. That wouldn't bother me at all. Maybe if somebody's ever in Austin, Texas, where I live now, they can give me a ring and I'll take them out and get them a beer and a barbecue. I'll be glad to do that. It's just that I think I'm very proud to have been a member of Local 600, and for all the advantages that has given me. I consider myself a very lucky person to be in the position that I went through. I worked with amazingly talented, interesting, fascinating people. A couple of them who were kind of scary, but they had their own place in society. Some of them I might not want to be a roommate with, but some of them I wouldn't mind being a roommate with. So, but we won't go there. Yeah, I appreciate this, being asked to do this interview, and I appreciate being a member of the SOC and of Local 600.
And speaking of the SOC, you received a Lifetime Achievement Award for camera operating. Let's take a look at your
Well,
camera.
I actually happen to have it with me.
Well, looky here.
Looky here. Look what followed me down to the set.
Yes.
See, I actually take this everywhere with me, which is odd sometimes, but I just set it out on the table. It's really good for cracking walnuts or keeping doors open. Good bookend, things of that nature. Yeah.
Well, it also
There it is.
attests to your wonderful career, which we've heard about at length today. So, in closing, thank you, Michael Scott, SOC.
Only one thing is, I tried to sell it, but they said it wasn't real gold.
Well, we appreciate it. Thank you, Michael, very much.
My pleasure. Well, just when you thought you'd gotten rid of me, I'm back. And the reason is, I need to tell you about a significant event in my camera operating career that influenced my philosophy or method of camera operating and blocking scenes, etc. It was on a comedy over in Pasadena at one of these stately old mansions, a garden party with everybody dressed up celebrating a graduation or a birthday or something like that. It was in the early days of Steadicam, and I was actually the Steadicam operator on this show. I quickly learned that I was not cut out to be a Steadicam operator and made the wise decision to not continue down that path. I was never comfortable with it, and quite frankly, I was terrible. So those people that do become Steadicam operators and are good at it have my admiration and my awe, because what they do is truly unique and fantastic. People that I've worked with, like Larry McConkie and Greg Lunsgaard, Greg Smith, are three that come to mind, and there are others, of course. They definitely have my admiration. But back to the show. This was, like I said, a comedy. They had just fired the director and chose John Cassavetes to become the director, which everyone thought was a strange choice because he's not known for his comedy skills. And in fact, he did put his unique, peculiar view onto the comedy that we were doing. So it was the first day of filming with Mr. Cassavetes, and I'm doing a Steadicam shot. He says, now you're to be on this group of people, and at some point you'll go over to the cello player and go in close on the bowing. And I said, okay, when do you want me to do that? He said, you'll know. and I'll find out what kind of a camera operator you are. So, wow, no pressure there. Anyway, he yells action, and I'm on the dialogue and things are happening, and I'm wondering when I'm supposed to go over there. Then at some point there's a gesture or a movement of some sort, and I thought, this is it. And so I go over to the cello player and hold on him bowing, and I'm quite proud of myself for picking it up. We hold for a few moments, and Mr. Cassavetes says, cut. He walks over to me and says, why did you choose to go then? And I told him my reasons, because this happened and that happened. He said, oh, okay. So he turns around and he goes, talks to the actors. And he also talks to the AD who handles the background action. Doesn't talk to me, which I found a little strange. So now we're at take 2. We're rolling, he yells action. I'm holding on the dialogue, the foursome. And we get to the point that I went over to the cello player on the previous take, but now things are different. There's different action in the background. There's different action with the principals. I'm wondering if I had missed the opportunity to go over there, that I didn't see it right. About the time that I'm really getting worried, there's a certain action, again, I can't remember exactly what it was, and it just takes me right over to the cello player. And I go in on close on the bowing, and we hold for a few moments. Cassavetes yells cut, and he yells, that's what I wanted right there. So I was talking to him, I said, why didn't you just tell me to go over there then? And he said, because I have to construct the scene so that the camera wants to go over there when I want it to go over there. And you are my eyes, and you have to take the camera over there. If I don't construct things so that you want to go there when I want to, then I haven't constructed the scene correctly. And that's what I was doing. So this has I've always remembered that. It always made me to try to block a scene so that the camera naturally goes over, and not just naturally, but actually wants to go to some sort of a movement, whether it's a rise or a fall or a pan or whatever, that the camera actually wants to do that. You'll work with some directors and some directors of photography who won't let you do that. They want you to do things when they want you to, and that's fine. That works on some occasions and not on some occasions. There's not just one way of doing it. But what Mr. Cassavetes taught me at that time influenced me a lot in my career, and I felt it made me a much better camera operator than I was. Hopefully you can use this information too. Anyway, consider it when you're blocking out a scene. Does the camera want to go over there, or does it not? That's it. I hope it's useful. And until the next time.